The screen door bumps shut behind somebody carrying a bowl with corn still steaming in it. The smoke from the grill hangs low because the air has gone still. You can hear kids laughing somewhere near the hose. There is a dog under the picnic table hoping something drops. The light is doing that soft summer thing where everything looks like the kind of life people say they want when they talk about getting out of town and finding a place with a little bit of ground. And then, just like that, the evening starts getting taken away one bite at a time. One lands behind your knee, another finds your wrist while you are reaching for a plate. Someone at the table slaps their shoulder and says, "They're bad tonight." Then it is ankles, ears, the back of the neck. Somebody gets up to eat standing near the doorway. Somebody else disappears inside for the can of spray. By the time the burgers are done, half the people are leaning through the screen door, talking to the ones still outside, like the porch belongs to the bugs now, and you are just borrowing it until dark. If that sounds familiar, then you already know what usually comes next. You try the candle that smells nice and does not seem to bother a single thing with wings. You drag out the electric zapper that crackles all night long and somehow still leaves you getting chewed up while every harmless moth in the county dies for no reason. You buy the spray, then you buy more spray, then a refill, then another little gadget somebody swore by. And every summer the money disappears the same way, little by little, until you realize you have spent a good piece of your season paying for temporary relief in little cans and cartridges that run out faster than you remember. Now I want to show you something old, not fancy, not plugged in, not soaked in poison, not one of those things where a company has to keep selling you a refill forever just so the thing on your porch can keep pretending to work. This is about the quiet way people used to think about a yard before everything became a product. The Amish, old farmers, folks who had to sit outside because their life was outside, did not have much patience for solutions that only worked until the bottle was empty. They paid attention to where water sat, where dampness stayed, where shade held in the evening, what insects liked, and how to make a place less welcoming to them without turning the whole property into a chemistry set. And buried inside that way of thinking is one little method that still gets passed around every year once the heat shows up. Some families use a simple copper and galvanized stake in damp ground. Some swear by copper placed near problem water. Others talk less about the metal and more about where you place it and what else you change around it. The truth, and I want to be straight about this right from the beginning, is that if you are looking for a miracle sentence where I tell you this one trick wipes every bug off your property forever, you are on the wrong porch. That is not how real life works. What I am going to give you is better than that. I am going to give you the old country way of thinking that makes a yard harder for bugs to own. I am going to show you the little metal setup people still build, why they build it, where it goes, what it may help with, what it absolutely cannot do by itself, and why the bigger secret is not one object at all. The bigger secret is that the yard itself has to stop helping the bugs. If you are new here, I'm Eli Yoder. My wife and I work the land here in Lancaster County, and on this channel we talk about the plain, practical ways households used to handle the everyday aggravations of life before every answer came wrapped in plastic with a barcode on it. If that sounds like your sort of place, stay with me. And if you know somebody who cannot sit outside for 20 minutes without coming back in scratching, send this to them, because this one is for that exact house, that exact porch, that exact summer evening. Now this comes up every year for a reason. People want something safe around kids, safe around pets, safe around food, safe around the places they actually live, and they want it to be cheap enough that trying it does not feel like a gamble. That is why methods like this spread so fast. Not because people are fools, because people are tired of solving the same problem over and over, tired of buying one more little answer that works for 3 evenings and then makes them go back to the store, tired of a yard that looks nice in daylight and becomes off limits by supper. Years ago, before I paid much attention to any of this, I noticed something that kept bothering me. One side of a property can feel almost livable at dusk, and another side, only a short distance away, can feel like a punishment. Same weather, same hour, same family. But one spot is tolerable and the other is swarming. That tells you right away the answer is not random. Something about the land, the moisture, the airflow, the objects left around, the water nobody notices, the way shade lingers near a fence or a barrel or a little hollow in the ground. That is what determines whether the bugs treat your yard like a hallway or a nursery. That is the part modern people skip. We think in terms of attack. What can I spray? What can I burn? What can I hang? But the older mindset was different. The older mindset was, why are they comfortable here in the first place? And that question is where this whole thing starts making sense. Let me talk first about the little stake method, because that is the part everybody wants to hear. Then I am going to widen the lens, because if you only copy the object and ignore the rest, you are doing exactly what modern marketing trains people to do. You are treating the symptom and keeping the cause. The basic build is simple. One wooden stake, bare copper wire, galvanized wire. Nothing touching where it should not. Damp ground. That is it. You spiral the copper around part of the stake. You spiral the galvanized wire around another portion. You set it into soil that stays moist, especially near a problem edge of the yard, a downspout area, a garden perimeter, near a sitting area, or by the spots where you already know the bugs gather in the stillness of evening. Some folks use one, some use 3 around a porch or patio. Some place them near water that cannot easily be removed. Some people are convinced it helps, some say it only helps a little. A few say they saw no difference at all. And I want to stop right there, because honesty is the only way a script like this stays useful. If somebody promises you a magical invisible fence that every mosquito, fly, and biting bug respects like it hit a brick wall, that person is trying to sell you certainty that life rarely gives. I do not deal in that kind of talk. What I will tell you is that 2 different metals in damp conditions do create a small electrical reaction. That part is plain chemistry. But whether that small reaction is the thing doing the heavy lifting in a yard, or whether the better results come from the fact that people who install these are also the same people finally paying attention to standing water, wet corners, drainage, barrels, shade lines, and breeding spots. That is where I think a lot of the real story lives. Because here is the thing I have seen over and over. The people who say a method suddenly worked often changed 6 other quiet things at the same time without even realizing it. They moved the barrel, they cleaned the gutter, they cut the grass. They shifted the chairs away from the hedge line, they started dumping water from toys and pots. They got serious about keeping the dog bowl changed out. They stopped giving the bugs a place to multiply 100 at a time. That is the real dividing line. So if you are going to try the steak, try it properly. Do not treat it like a magic wand. Treat it like one piece in a plain, layered system. Here is how I would build it. Start with a sturdy wooden garden stake, something around 2 to 3 feet long. It does not need to be pretty. This is not porch decor. It is work. Cut a length of bare copper wire around 3 feet. Wrap that wire around the lower section of the stake in a loose spiral, leaving enough wire so that most of what you care about will sit below ground once the stake is driven in. Then cut a similar length of galvanized wire and spiral that around the upper part, making sure the 2 never touch, not once, not at the top, not in the middle, not where the spirals cross. Keep them separated. Then drive that stake into the ground where the soil is naturally damp or can be kept damp without fuss. That matters. Dry dust is not going to do much for you. Dampness is the whole point. If the ground is hard and dry, soak the area first. If the location never holds moisture, pick another spot. a downspout edge, a watered flower bed border, a low corner that stays shaded, a planter box near a patio, the outer side of a vegetable patch. Those are the kinds of places people usually mean when they say this works best. If you have a porch or sitting area, think in terms of a perimeter instead of a single point. 3 placements around the outside edge will always make more sense than one lonely stake 50 feet away by the shed. Bugs do not care about your hopes. They follow moisture, scent, still air, and breeding ground. So place anything you build where it interacts with the actual pattern of the yard, not where it looks convenient. Now let me say the safety part slowly, because this is where common sense matters more than excitement. First, fold or tuck every sharp wire end. A plain little setup at ankle height is not dangerous because of electricity. It is dangerous because metal ends are sharp and bare feet are bare feet. Kids run, dogs investigate. You do not get extra points for building something ugly and pointy in the dark. Second, if you are using any metal around food gardens, keep it at the edges, outer perimeter, near the approach, not in the middle of where your hands are going into the soil all season. Copper and zinc are not fairy dust. Use a light touch. Use it thoughtfully. This is not a more is better situation. It is a be sensible situation. Third, if your property has buried irrigation, lines, or anything you are not sure about, know where it is before you start pushing stakes into the ground. You only need to nick one thing once to turn a thrifty little experiment into a weekend nobody needed. And fourth, if your bug problem is severe, standing water you cannot manage, swampy edges, heavy mosquito pressure, or an area where mosquito-borne illness is a real concern, do not play games with your family's health. Use every sensible layer available. Source control first. Physical barriers second. Personal protection when needed. There is no badge for making life harder on yourself just to prove you are old-fashioned enough. That last point matters because one reason these secret videos travel so far is that people are hungry for an answer that feels wholesome. I understand that, but wholesome is not the same as effective, and effective is not the same as complete. The goal is not to perform simplicity. The goal is to get your evenings back. So let us talk about the larger secret, because this is the part that actually changes a yard. The old Amish and farmstead way was never just put this object here. It was always, why does the place behave this way? Where does the roof dump water? What sits wet for days? Which side of the property stays still after sunset? Is there a gutter dripping near the chairs? Is there a wheelbarrow with half an inch of water sitting in it for a week? A kiddie pool, a bird bath nobody scrubs, plant saucers, a tarp with a belly in it. Buckets behind the shed, a clogged ditch, a low rut beside the driveway, a rain barrel without a cover, a forgotten tire, a toy wagon, a cracked flower pot. The bugs do not need a pond, they need opportunity. And that is the part people miss because opportunity is boring. There is nothing exciting about emptying a bucket. Nobody shares a dramatic thumbnail about tipping water out of old planters. But if you ask what actually changes the number of mosquitoes around a home, removing the places where they can breed is one of the most meaningful things you can do, and public health guidance is very clear about checking and emptying water-holding containers regularly, CDC. Think about that for a minute. The difference between misery and relief can be something as stupid as a bent plastic toy full of rainwater behind the garage. That is why the old approach works when it works. It is observant, it is not glamorous, it notices the pattern. If I came to your place and you said, Eli, the bugs are terrible out here, the first thing I would not do is reach for a gadget. I would walk, slowly, after rain if possible. I would look at every place water can sit 5 to 7 days without anyone caring. I would look at the gutter outlet. I would look at shade along the fence. I would look at whether your chairs are backed right up against the damper, windless side of the yard. I would look at the grass where it meets the brush. I would look at your screens. I would look at pet bowls, tubs, barrels, saucers, drain spots, and every forgotten object the property has absorbed one season at a time. Then, once the yard stops inviting bugs to be born and rest there, then I would consider the little stake placements around the edges of the living space. That order matters, because when people reverse that order, they think the old method failed, when really all they did was set one small thing inside a giant machine that was still manufacturing mosquitoes every week. Now maybe somebody listening has already tried every normal answer. You already dump the water. You already keep the place tidy. You already patch screens. You already use repellent on rough evenings. You want to know if this old metal method is worth an hour of your time. I think for many people it is worth testing, provided you test it honestly. Not for one night, not with 10 variables changing at once. Pick your problem area. Build a few. Place them intelligently. Keep the ground damp if needed. At the same time, go after the obvious water sources. Watch what happens over 2 or 3 weeks of similar weather. Keep track of where people naturally sit, where the dog lies down, which corner gets bad first at dusk, whether the bites come from the same damp edge every evening, whether one side improves and another does not. That is how practical people think, not in slogans, in patterns. And there is another reason this old style of solution appeals to people, and I do not think anyone says this out loud enough. It restores a feeling of control, not fake control, real attention. A yard is supposed to be something you learn, not something you endlessly medicate. When you start understanding why one patch is miserable and another patch is calm, the property stops feeling like an enemy and starts acting like a place you can read. That, to me, is the most attractive part of all of this. Now let me give you the fuller porch-to-yard setup I would use if I were trying to make the space meaningfully better without going overboard. I would place one stake near the damp side of the sitting area, one near the approach where air tends to stall, and one near the side closest to any water source or vegetation edge that stays thick through summer. I would keep them out of traffic, out of play paths, and away from where little hands are digging. I would clean every gutter downspout line and make sure water is moving away instead of puddling. I would empty, scrub, or flip anything that can hold rain. I would trim back the heavy edge growth close to where people sit at dusk. I would check window and screen door tiers before warm nights really set in, and on the evenings when the mosquitoes are still out in force, I would not act stubborn about it. I would use proven repellent on exposed skin and move on with my life, because the point is to enjoy supper outside, not to prove a philosophical point CDC. That is how old wisdom is supposed to be used, not as a religion, as a layer. And I want to say something about titles like this one, because I know how the internet works. Kills every bug in your yard is the kind of sentence that gets people to stop scrolling. I understand why those words travel, but once the clicking is done, you still owe people the truth. The truth is that bug problems are usually ecological before they are chemical. They are about habitat, moisture, breeding, shelter, timing, human habits. And if you solve those things, suddenly the small tricks seem smarter because they are no longer trying to do all the work alone. Maybe that is the real secret nobody bothers to put in the title. Not the stake, not the metal, not the folk story. Attention. Attention is the secret. Attention to water, attention to air, attention to where evening settles. Attention to what the yard has been quietly becoming while nobody was looking. That is why two neighbors on the same road can have completely different summers. One keeps buying things, the other keeps noticing things. Now, if you do decide to build these, keep your expectations grown up. You are not putting a force field around the house. You are making the space less favorable, a little less comfortable, maybe enough to matter when combined with everything else that should have been handled in the first place. Some of you will try it and swear the difference is obvious. Some of you will try it and decide the main win came from finally clearing the cluttered wet spots you had ignored for years. And honestly, I am fine with either answer because both roads lead to the same place, a yard that belongs to your family again. And that is what I care about. A table people can actually sit at, a porch that does not empty out at sunset, a kid chasing lightning bugs instead of scratching bites, a dog lying under the chair instead of hiding by the back door, a summer evening that stays whole all the way through supper. That is the image to keep in your mind, because that is what all these old methods were trying to protect, not just comfort, a way of living outside the house without feeling driven back in by every nuisance nature can throw at you. If you have an older relative who ever did something like this, I would love to hear about it. Maybe it was copper near the barrel. Maybe it was where they planted things. Maybe it was how they kept the ground sloped and the runoff moving. Maybe it was something stranger than any of that. Put it in the comments, because every time I bring up one of these plain old methods, somebody tells a story that opens up a whole new line of thinking, and half the time the best ideas are sitting in family memory instead of on a store shelf. And tell me where you are watching from too, because bug pressure is different everywhere. What ruins a July evening in one county is not always the same thing ruining it somewhere else. Dry country problems are not wet country problems. A wooded edge behaves differently than an open field. A porch over grass behaves differently than one over gravel. The more specific you are, the more useful these conversations get for everyone reading. If this helped you think about your yard a little differently, pass it along to somebody who keeps fighting the same battle every summer. And if you want to see where this whole thing really gets interesting, stay with me for the next one, because next time I want to show you something bigger than a single homemade device. I want to show you how older farms were laid out on purpose so that water kept moving, dampness stayed away from the house, animals sat where they served a purpose, and the living space was protected not by one product, but by the shape of the whole place. Once you start noticing that, you cannot unsee it. You begin to realize a lot of modern yards are arranged for appearance first and comfort second, pretty in daylight, miserable by dusk. And old places, for all their roughness, often understood something we forgot. If you make a property friendly to stagnant water, trapped heat, and still evening air, the bugs will thank you for it long before your family does. So try the stake if you want. Copper and galvanized, separated, in damp ground, placed with some thought instead of guesswork. But do not stop there. Walk after rain. Empty what holds water. Scrub what breeds in silence. Move what stays wet. Trim what turns still and shaded by supper. Patch the screens. Use repellent when the night calls for it. Layer your answers like practical people always have. Do that, and whether the little old trick turns out to help a little or a lot, you are still going to come out ahead. Because the real victory is not proving a secret. It is taking back the hour when the smoke is still hanging over the grill, the plates are full, the kids are barefoot, the dog is waiting under the table, and nobody has to retreat indoors before the evening is finished. That is the kind of fix worth chasing.